The black stallion reared up on its hind legs with a scream that could shatter glass, and Zelda Carmichael watched 3 grown men scatter like tumbleweeds in a dust storm, as 2,000 pounds of pure fury came crashing back down to earth with enough force to crack the corral fence. She had been passing through Miles City, Montana, on her way to a seamstress position in Billings when she heard the commotion. And now she stood at the edge of the chaos with her leather satchel still gripped in one gloved hand, unable to look away from the magnificent animal that had just sent the town's best horsemen running for their lives. It was August 1882, and the sun beat down mercilessly on the dusty streets of Miles City, a rough and tumble settlement that had sprung up along the Yellowstone River to serve the cattle ranchers and cavalry stationed at nearby Fort Keogh. Zelda had arrived on the morning stage, her dark hair pinned up beneath a practical bonnet, her traveling dress already coated with a fine layer of Montana dust. At 22 years old, she had expected to spend maybe an hour in this town before catching the next stage west, but the horse had changed everything. "Somebody's going to get killed," a woman muttered beside her, clutching her market basket with white knuckles. Zelda said nothing, but her green eyes tracked every movement the stallion made. The horse was coal-black except for a single white star on his forehead, and even in his rage, there was something heartbreakingly beautiful about the way he moved. This was not a mean animal. This was a terrified one. "That devil broke Jim's arm 2 days ago," another voice chimed in. "Kicked Tommy so hard yesterday he's still spitting up blood, and now he's thrown Marcus clean over the fence. Mr. Zane's gonna have to shoot him, mark my words." The name caught Zelda's attention. "Who's Mr. Zane?" "Harrison Zane," the first woman replied, nodding toward a tall figure striding across the street toward the corral. "Owns the biggest ranch in the territory. That's his horse, though I reckon not for much longer. Can't keep an animal that dangerous." Zelda studied the man approaching the corral with the careful eye of someone who had spent her entire life around horses, even if she had been forced to give up that life when her father's ranch failed 3 years ago. Harrison Zane moved with the confident grace of a man used to being in control, but there was tension in his broad shoulders beneath his dust-stained shirt. He was perhaps 26 or 27, with dark brown hair that needed cutting and a strong jaw shadowed with several days of stubble. Even from a distance, she could see the frustration etched into his sun-bronzed features. "Get back," Harrison commanded the crowd as he reached the corral. His voice was deep and carried the weight of authority. "Marcus, you all right?" The thrown cowhand was being helped to his feet by 2 others, limping badly but apparently intact. "I'm fine, boss. But that horse is past saving. He's got the devil in him." Harrison's hands clenched on the top rail of the fence, and Zelda saw something flash across his face that looked like genuine pain. "He's the finest horse I've ever seen. His bloodlines go back to horses that carried kings. I paid more money than I care to admit to bring him all the way from Kentucky, and I'll be damned if I put a bullet in him just because nobody in this territory knows how to handle him properly." "Ain't nobody can handle him, Mr. Zane," another man said. "We tried everything." "He's wild as they come." "He wasn't wild when he left Kentucky," Harrison shot back. "Something happened to him on the journey here. He's scared, not vicious." The words were out of Zelda's mouth before she could stop them. "You're right." Every head turned to stare at her, including Harrison Zane's. His eyes were a striking shade of amber brown, and they fixed on her with an intensity that made her breath catch in her throat for reasons that had nothing to do with the horse. "Excuse me," he said. Zelda felt her cheeks warm, but she lifted her chin and stepped forward. "I said you're right. That horse isn't mean. Look at his eyes, the way he's constantly checking the corners of the corral. Something frightened him badly, and now he's just trying to protect himself." Harrison's expression shifted from surprise to something more assessing. "And you know this because I grew up on a horse ranch in Colorado. My father bred quarter horses for the cavalry before we lost the ranch to drought and debt." She heard the bitterness creep into her voice and forced it back down. "I worked with horses from the time I could walk until 3 years ago. That stallion of yours is one of the most beautiful animals I've ever seen, and it would be a waste to destroy him." The crowd had gone quiet, watching this exchange with the keen interest of people who had precious little entertainment in their daily lives. Harrison studied her for a long moment, his gaze traveling from her face to her practical traveling clothes and back again. Zelda refused to look away, even though something about this man's attention made her feel uncomfortably warm despite the evening shadows beginning to creep across the street. "Can you break him?" Harrison asked suddenly. Zelda blinked. "What? Can you break him?" Harrison repeated, pushing away from the fence and walking toward her with long strides. He was tall, she realized, at least 6 feet, and there was a lean strength to his frame that spoke of hard work and harder living. "You say you know horses. You say he's not vicious. Can you prove it?" "Mr. Zane, that's crazy," someone protested. "She's a woman." "I've got eyes, thanks," Harrison said without looking away from Zelda. "I've also got 3 injured men and a horse worth more than most people in this town will see in a lifetime. If she can do what my men can't, I don't give a damn if she's a woman, a Chinaman, or a trained bear." He stopped in front of Zelda, close enough that she had to tilt her head back to meet his eyes. "Well, can you do it?" Zelda's heart was pounding. The smart thing would be to say no, to walk away, to get on that stage to Billings and take up the quiet, safe life of a seamstress that she had planned. But as she looked past Harrison's shoulder at the black stallion still racing around the corral, ears pinned back and eyes rolling white with fear, she felt something stir in her chest that she had thought died 3 years ago when the bank took her father's ranch. "Yes," she heard herself say. "I can break him." A murmur ran through the crowd. Harrison's eyes narrowed slightly, but there was something that might have been respect in them now. "When? Give me 3 days," Zelda said, her mind already racing ahead to what she would need. "And I need your word that nobody else will try to work with him in that time. No one in the corral but me." "Done." Harrison held out his hand, and after a moment's hesitation, Zelda shook it. His palm was rough with calluses and warm, and the contact sent an unexpected jolt up her arm. "Name your price." Zelda hadn't thought that far ahead. Her traveling money was nearly gone, and the seamstress position in Billings suddenly seemed very far away. "Room and board for the 3 days, and if I succeed, enough money to get me to Billings with something left over to live on while I find work. And if you don't succeed," Harrison's expression was unreadable, "then I'll leave with nothing but the room and board." Zelda pulled her hand back, trying to ignore the strange tingling in her fingers. "But I will succeed." "Confidence," Harrison said, and the corner of his mouth quirked up in what might have been the ghost of a smile. "I like that. Marcus, show Miss Carmichael to the guest room in the main house. And somebody get that stallion some hay and water. If she's going to work with him tomorrow, he needs to settle down for the night." The crowd began to disperse, some people shaking their heads at the foolishness of it all, others already starting to gossip about the strange woman who thought she could do what 3 experienced cowboys could not. Zelda watched Harrison give orders to his men, his voice calm and authoritative, and wondered what exactly she had just gotten herself into. The Zane ranch house was larger than she had expected, a sturdy 2-story structure built of thick logs with a wide porch that wrapped around 3 sides. Marcus, limping and clearly skeptical of the entire situation, showed her to a clean if sparsely furnished guest room on the second floor. A simple bed with a patchwork quilt, a washstand with a chipped pitcher and basin, and a small window that looked out toward the corral where the black stallion was finally standing still, head lowered as he drank deeply from a water trough. "Supper's at 6, Marcus said gruffly. "Don't reckon you'll last 5 minutes with that devil horse tomorrow, but Mr. Zane gave his word, so you'll get your 3 days. He paused in the doorway, his weathered face serious. "Word of advice, miss. That horse has hurt 3 men now. Don't let pride make you the 4th casualty." "I appreciate your concern," Zelda said quietly, "but I know what I'm doing." After Marcus left, Zelda unpinned her bonnet and set it on the bed, then moved to the window. The sun was setting now, painting the Montana sky in shades of orange and deep purple. The ranch stretched out below her, and she could see several outbuildings, a large barn, corrals with other horses, and in the distance, cattle grazing on the rolling plains. It was beautiful and harsh all at once, like everything else in this territory. She had not lied when she told Harrison Zane she could break the horse. What she had not mentioned was that it had been 3 years since she had worked with a difficult animal. 3 years since she had done anything more challenging than carry packages for the dry goods store owner who had taken pity on her in Denver. Her father had taught her everything he knew before the drink took him, and before that, he had been one of the best horsemen in Colorado. The question was whether she still had the skill and the nerve to do what needed to be done. Supper was an awkward affair. The long table in the ranch house dining room could easily seat 12, but tonight there were only 5 people present. Harrison at the head, 3 of his ranch hands including Marcus and Zelda. The food was simple but plentiful, beef and beans and fresh bread, and the men ate with the focused intensity of people who worked hard for their living. Zelda kept her eyes on her plate and tried not to feel the weight of their skeptical glances. "Tell me about your father's ranch," Harrison said suddenly, breaking the silence. Zelda looked up to find him watching her with those intense amber eyes. "What do you want to know? How big was it? How many horses did he keep?" "About a quarter the size of your spread, from what I saw riding in," Zelda said carefully. "We usually had 30 to 40 horses at various stages of training. My father specialized in cavalry mounts, horses with speed and endurance that could handle the sound of gunfire without spooking. We had contracts with Fort Lyon and Fort Garland." "Had," Harrison repeated softly. "What happened?" Zelda set down her fork, her appetite suddenly gone. "Drought came in 78, lasted 2 years, lost half the herd the first year, most of the rest the second. My mother had died the year before, and my father started drinking to cope with the grief. By the time the rains came back, we were too far in debt to recover. The bank took the land, the house, everything. My father died 6 months later. The doctor said it was his liver, but I think it was a broken heart. The table had gone very quiet. Even the ranch hands had stopped eating. Harrison's expression was hard to read, but there was something in his eyes that looked like understanding. "I'm sorry," he said, and it sounded genuine. "That's a hard thing to lose." "Yes, well." Zelda picked up her fork again, determined not to show weakness in front of these strangers. "Life goes on. I found work in Denver, saved enough money for the stage fare to Billings. There's a seamstress there who needs an assistant. It's not horses, but it's honest work." "You have a gift for horses, though," Harrison said. "I can tell. The way you watched the stallion, the way you talked about him, that's not something you can learn from a book. That's instinct." Zelda met his gaze across the table. "Instinct doesn't pay debts, Mr. Zane." "No," he agreed. "But it's a rare thing nonetheless. And call me Harrison." If you're going to be staying under my roof even for 3 days, we might as well dispense with formalities." "Then you should call me Zelda," she replied, and saw something flicker in his expression that she could not quite name. After supper, Zelda excused herself and went back to the corral. The ranch had grown quiet as the hands settled in for the night, and the stars were beginning to emerge in the vast Montana sky. The black stallion was standing in the far corner of the corral, his dark coat nearly invisible in the shadows. When Zelda approached the fence, he threw up his head and snorted, but he did not charge or rear. "Easy," Zelda murmured, keeping her voice low and soothing. "I'm not going to hurt you, beautiful boy. I'm going to help you if you'll let me." She did not try to enter the corral. Instead, she simply stood at the fence, talking to the horse in that same quiet voice, letting him get used to her presence. Her father had taught her that trust was built slowly, one small step at a time, and that rushing the process would only make things worse. She did not know how long she stood there, but when she finally turned to go back to the house, she found Harrison leaning against the porch rail, watching her. In the lamplight spilling from the windows, his face was half in shadow, but she could feel the intensity of his attention. "Does he seem calmer to you?" Harrison asked as she climbed the porch steps. "A little," Zelda admitted. "He's listening, at least. That's a start." Harrison was silent for a moment, then said, "Why did you really offer to break him?" "You could have just kept walking, caught your stage to Billings, started your new life." Zelda considered the question. "Because when I looked at that horse, I saw something worth saving. And I suppose I've spent the last 3 years feeling like everything worth saving got taken away from me. This seemed like a chance to prove that good things can be salvaged if you're willing to fight for them." The words hung in the air between them, more honest than she had intended. Harrison pushed away from the rail and moved closer, and Zelda found herself very aware of his height, his presence, the way the lamplight caught in his dark hair. "I understand that feeling," he said quietly. "I built this ranch from nothing, bought my first 100 acres with money I saved working on cattle drives for 5 years. Every inch of this place represents something I fought for, something I refused to let slip away. That stallion represents the future I want for this ranch, breeding stock that will produce the finest horses in the territory. But more than that, he's mine, and I don't give up on what's mine." There was something in the way he said it, in the way he looked at her, that made Zelda's breath catch. She took a small step back, suddenly very aware that they were alone in the shadows, that no one would see or hear if something inappropriate happened. "I should go to bed," she said, her voice coming out a little breathless. "I want to start working with him at first light. Of course." Harrison inclined his head, and if he noticed her retreat, he gave no sign of it. "Sleep well, Zelda." She fled to her room like a schoolgirl, her heart pounding in a way that had nothing to do with fear and everything to do with the way Harrison Zane had looked at her in the lamplight. She was being ridiculous, she told herself as she changed into her nightgown and climbed into bed. She was here to break a horse, collect her money, and move on to Billings. Whatever she thought she had seen in Harrison's eyes was just her imagination, fueled by exhaustion and the strange circumstances of the day. But as she lay in the darkness, listening to the sounds of the ranch settling in for the night, she could not stop thinking about the tall rancher with the amber eyes who looked at his horse the way her father used to look at his prized stallions, with a mixture of pride and longing and fierce protectiveness. The next morning, Zelda was up before dawn. She dressed in the oldest, most practical clothes she owned, a simple skirt and shirtwaist that had seen better days, and braided her long, dark hair to keep it out of her way. When she came downstairs, she found Harrison already in the kitchen, pouring coffee from a pot on the stove. "You're up early," he said, handing her a tin cup of the strong, bitter brew. "So are you," Zelda replied, wrapping her hands around the cup and savoring the warmth. "Ranch doesn't run itself." Harrison leaned against the counter, his own cup cradled in one hand. He looked like he had been up for a while, already dressed for work in denims and a faded blue shirt. "Do you need anything before you start with the stallion?" "Just rope and patience," Zelda said. "And I'll need everyone to stay away from the corral while I'm working. Horses can sense tension, and if your men are standing around waiting for me to fail, the stallion will pick up on that energy." "Fair enough." Harrison drained his coffee and set the cup in the sink. "I'll spread the word. But I'm going to be working in the barn this morning, close enough to hear if something goes wrong." Zelda wanted to argue that she did not need a protector, but the practical part of her brain acknowledged that having someone nearby in case the stallion got violent was simply common sense. "Thank you." The sky was beginning to lighten in the east when Zelda walked out to the corral, the air still cool with the night's chill. The black stallion was standing near the water trough, and his ears pricked forward when he saw her approaching. Zelda moved slowly, deliberately, making no sudden movements. She did not go directly to the gate but instead walked around the perimeter of the corral, letting the horse track her movements, letting him see that she was not a threat. After several circuits, she finally approached the gate. The stallion snorted and backed away, his muscles tensing. Zelda opened the gate just wide enough to slip through, then closed it behind her. Now it was just the two of them, woman and horse, separated by about 30 feet of dusty ground. "Hello, beautiful," Zelda said softly. "My name's Zelda, and you and I are going to become friends." The stallion tossed his head, his dark eyes fixed on her. Zelda could see the whites showing, see the tension in every line of his body. She did not move toward him. Instead, she sat down in the dust, crossing her legs and resting her hands in her lap. It was a posture of complete non-aggression, and she knew from years of experience that it confused horses who expected humans to chase them, try to dominate them. Time passed slowly. The sun climbed higher, painting the corral in shades of gold and amber. Zelda sat perfectly still, occasionally talking to the stallion in that same low, soothing voice. She told him about her father's ranch, about the horses she had known and loved, about the long trip from Colorado to Montana. The words did not matter as much as the tone, the steady calm of her presence. By mid-morning, the stallion had stopped pacing. He was still watching her, but his ears were no longer pinned back, and some of the tension had left his muscles. Slowly, carefully, Zelda stood up. The stallion took a few steps backward, but when she did not pursue him, he stopped and waited. Zelda turned her back on him. It was a calculated risk, one her father had taught her. Predators faced their prey head-on. By turning away, by showing the stallion that she was not a threat, she was speaking to him in the only language that mattered. She heard him snort behind her, heard the soft thud of hooves on hard, packed earth. Every instinct screamed at her to turn around, to protect herself, but she forced herself to remain still. The soft velvet touch of whiskers against her shoulder made her heart leap into her throat, but she did not move. The stallion was investigating her, his warm breath stirring her hair as he snuffled at her neck and shoulder. Zelda kept her hands at her sides, her posture relaxed, and continued to talk in that low, soothing voice. "That's right," she murmured. "I'm not going to hurt you. You're safe with me." The stallion huffed and pulled back, and Zelda waited a long moment before slowly turning around. He was standing just a few feet away, his head high but his ears forward now, genuinely curious. She held out her hand, palm down, letting him catch her scent. After a moment's hesitation, the stallion stretched his neck and bumped her hand with his nose. Zelda felt a surge of triumph so intense it made her dizzy. This was what she had been missing for 3 long years. This connection, this moment of trust between human and animal. She stroked the stallion's nose gently, feeling the softness of his skin, the warmth of his breath. "Good boy," she whispered. "Such a good, brave boy." From somewhere beyond the corral, she heard the sharp intake of breath that told her she had an audience, but she did not look away from the stallion. This moment was too precious to break. She spent the next hour simply being present with the horse, touching him gently, letting him investigate her, building that foundation of trust. When she finally left the corral at noon, her legs were shaky from adrenaline and her clothes were covered in dust, but she felt more alive than she had in years. Harrison was standing by the barn, his arms crossed over his chest, and the expression on his face was something between amazement and respect. "How did you do that?" he asked as she approached. "Patience," Zelda said simply. "And respect. He's been treated like an object, something to be dominated and controlled. I treated him like a thinking, feeling creature who deserves to have his fears acknowledged." Harrison shook his head slowly. "I've never seen anything like it. Marcus was watching from the bunkhouse, and I thought he was going to fall over when the stallion touched you." "It's just the first step," Zelda cautioned, though she could not keep the smile from her face. "He let me into his space, but he's not ready to be ridden yet. I'll need the full 3 days, maybe more." "Take all the time you need," Harrison said, and there was something in his voice that made Zelda look up sharply. He was watching her with an expression she could not quite decipher, a mixture of admiration and something warmer, something that made her pulse quicken. "I should clean up," she said, suddenly very aware of how disheveled she must look. "And I'm starving. Come up to the house. Cookie made stew and there's fresh bread." Harrison fell into step beside her as they walked toward the ranch house. "Can I ask you something?" "Of course." "Why did you give up horses? After your father's ranch was lost, why not find work at another ranch, doing what you're clearly so good at?" Zelda was quiet for a moment, choosing her words carefully. "Because ranchers don't hire women to break horses, Harrison. They hire women to cook and clean and mend clothes. I spent 6 months trying to find work with horses after my father died, and every single ranch owner looked at me like I had lost my mind. The best offer I got was mucking out stalls for a quarter of what they would have paid a man to do the same work. I needed to eat, needed a place to live, so I took what I could get. The seamstress job in Billings is at least honest work with a decent wage." "That's a damned shame," Harrison said, and the anger in his voice surprised her. "Talent like yours shouldn't be wasted because of small-minded fools who can't see past your skirts." Zelda glanced at him, struck by the genuine indignation on his behalf. "That's kind of you to say." "It's not kindness, it's common sense." Harrison held the door to the ranch house open for her. "In Montana, we can't afford to be picky about who does what job. If someone has a skill, they should use it, man or woman. Life out here is too hard to waste talent." The stew was hearty and delicious, and Zelda ate 2 bowls while Harrison asked her detailed questions about her techniques with the stallion. She found herself relaxing in his presence, enjoying the way he listened so intently, the intelligence in his questions. He was not just making conversation. He genuinely wanted to understand what she was doing and why. "Your father taught you all this?" Harrison asked as Zelda finished her second helping. "Everything I know about horses came from him," Zelda confirmed. "He learned from his father, who learned from his father. My grandfather worked with wild mustangs in Texas before the war. The techniques get passed down, refined over generations." "You'll pass them on to your children someday," Harrison said, then seemed to realize what he had implied. A faint flush crept up his neck. "I mean, if you have children." Not that I'm assuming you will, or should. That's your business entirely." Zelda felt her own cheeks warm at his flustered response. There was something endearing about seeing the confident rancher suddenly so discomposed. "I'd like to have children someday," she said softly. "I'd like to teach them everything my father taught me, assuming I ever get the chance to use those skills again." Their eyes met across the table, and something electric seemed to arc between them. Harrison opened his mouth as if to say something, then closed it again, seeming to think better of whatever he had been about to say. Instead, he stood and began gathering up the dishes. "You should rest this afternoon," he said, his voice a little rough. "You'll need your strength for tomorrow." Zelda did try to rest, but she found herself too keyed up to sleep. Instead, she sat by the window and watched the ranch yard below, observing the rhythms of the place. Harrison was everywhere, it seemed, helping to repair a section of fence, conferring with his foreman about which pastures to move the cattle to, working alongside his men to shoe a horse that had thrown a shoe. He did not just give orders from a distance. He worked as hard as anyone on the ranch, and she could see the respect it earned him from his men. As the afternoon wore on, Zelda found her gaze drawn back to the corral where the black stallion stood. He was calmer now, she thought, though still alert to every movement around him. She wondered what had happened to him during his journey from Kentucky. What had frightened him so badly that he had turned from a valuable thoroughbred into an animal 3 men could not handle. That evening, after another quiet supper, Zelda returned to the corral. The stallion nickered when he saw her, a soft sound that made her heart swell with hope. She spent an hour just talking to him, standing outside the fence this time, letting him come to her when he was ready. He eventually approached, stretching his neck over the top rail to lip at her sleeve. Zelda stroked his neck, marveling at the powerful muscles beneath the sleek coat. "You're going to be magnificent when you finally let yourself trust again," she murmured. "Any cowboy in Montana would be honored to ride a horse like you." "I'm not planning to let just any cowboy ride him," Harrison's voice said from behind her, making her jump. "Sorry, I didn't mean to startle you. It's all right." Zelda turned to find him standing a few feet away, his hat in his hands. The setting sun caught in his dark hair, turning it almost auburn at the tips. "What do you mean about not letting anyone ride him?" Harrison moved closer, his eyes on the stallion. "I bought him for breeding stock, like I said, but more than that, I bought him for myself. I've been riding ranch horses my whole life, good solid animals that get the job done. But when I saw this stallion's bloodlines, read about his speed and stamina, I thought maybe it was time I had a horse that was more than just practical. A horse that was special." "He is that," Zelda agreed softly. "So are you," Harrison said, so quietly she almost did not catch it. Zelda's breath hitched. She turned to look at him fully and found him watching her with an intensity that made her feel warm all over. "Harrison, I don't think that's appropriate." "Probably not," he agreed, but he did not look away. "But it's true nonetheless. You walked into my life yesterday, a complete stranger, and in one day you've done what 3 of my best men couldn't do in 2 weeks. You're remarkable, Zelda Carmichael, and I think you don't hear that often enough." No one had spoken to her like that in years, not since before her mother died, before everything fell apart. Zelda felt tears prick at her eyes and blinked them back fiercely. "Thank you," she managed. "That means more than you know." They stood in silence for a while, watching the stallion together as the sky deepened from orange to purple to the deep blue of twilight. When Zelda finally turned to go back to the house, Harrison walked with her, and their hands brushed together in the darkness. Neither of them pulled away. The second day, Zelda introduced the stallion to a lead rope. It took patience and several false starts, but by noon she had the rope clipped to his halter and was leading him around the corral. He was still skittish, still prone to throwing his head up at sudden movements, but the blind panic was gone. He was learning to trust, one small step at a time. Harrison watched from the barn again, though this time he was more open about it, standing in the doorway where she could see him. Zelda found his presence oddly comforting rather than distracting. There was something solid and reassuring about knowing he was there, ready to help if things went wrong, but trusting her to do what needed to be done. By the afternoon of the second day, Zelda was able to saddle the stallion. He danced and snorted when she lifted the saddle onto his back, but he did not rear or try to buck it off. She took her time, adjusting every strap with gentle hands, talking to him constantly in that low, soothing voice. When she finally stepped back, the stallion stood there with the saddle on his back, trembling slightly but holding steady. "Good boy," Zelda breathed. "Such a brave, good boy." She did not try to mount him that day. Instead, she led him around the corral with the saddle on, letting him get used to the weight and feel of it. By the time she removed the saddle and left the corral, the sun was setting and she was exhausted, but the triumph singing through her veins made every aching muscle worth it. Harrison was waiting for her with a dipper of cool water from the well. Zelda drank gratefully, aware of how dusty and sweaty she must be, how her hair was coming loose from its braid in wild curls around her face. "Tomorrow?" Harrison asked. "Tomorrow," Zelda confirmed. "If all goes well, I'll ride him tomorrow." That night at supper, even the skeptical ranch hands were forced to admit that Zelda had accomplished something extraordinary. Marcus, his arm still in a sling from the stallion's earlier rampage, shook his head in wonder. "I've been working with horses for 20 years, he said, "and I've never seen anything like what you did today, Miss Carmichael. That horse was calmer with you than I've ever seen him." "It's not magic," Zelda said, though she could not keep the pleased smile from her face. "It's just patience and understanding." "Well, whatever it is, it's impressive," another hand chimed in. "I'll admit I didn't think you stood a chance, but you've proved me wrong." After supper, Zelda found herself on the porch again with Harrison. It was becoming a habit, these quiet conversations in the evening darkness, and she knew she should probably put a stop to it. She would be leaving soon, after all, heading to Billings and the seamstress position, and a life that had no room for tall ranchers with amber eyes and voices that made her insides feel fluttery. "What will you name him?" Zelda asked, more to break the charged silence than because she really needed to know. "I was thinking Midnight," Harrison said. "Because of his color, and because I first saw him at midnight when they unloaded him from the train. He was fighting the handlers even then, scared out of his mind. I should have known then that something was wrong, but I was too excited about finally owning him to pay attention." "You can't blame yourself for what happened," Zelda said gently. "Sometimes horses get traumatized and there's no way to predict it or prevent it." "I know." Harrison was quiet for a moment, then said, "What will you do in Billings? I mean, besides work for the seamstress. Do you have family there? Friends?" "No," Zelda admitted. "I don't have family anywhere anymore. My mother was an only child and she died before my father. My father had a brother, but he moved to California in '68 and we lost touch. It's just me now." "That's a lonely way to live," Harrison said softly. "Sometimes," Zelda agreed. "But it's also freeing in a way. I can go where I want, do what I want. I don't have obligations tying me down." "Is that what you want? To be free of obligations?" Zelda considered the question. A week ago, she would have said yes without hesitation. But standing here on Harrison Zane's porch, with the sound of crickets chirping in the grass and the vast Montana sky spread out above them, she was not so sure anymore. "I don't know what I want," she said honestly. For 3 years, I've just been surviving, putting one foot in front of the other. I haven't let myself think about what I actually want from life. Maybe you should, Harrison said. He was standing close enough now that she could see the individual whiskers of stubble on his jaw, could smell the faint scent of leather and soap that seemed to cling to him. Life's too short to just survive, Zelda. At some point, you have to let yourself live again. The words hit her like a physical blow, not because they were harsh, but because they were true. She had been in a kind of stasis for 3 years, frozen in the moment her father died and the last piece of her old life slipped away. She had not let herself want anything beyond the basics of food and shelter, because wanting more meant risking another loss, another heartbreak. "What do you want?" she asked, turning the question back on him. Harrison's smile was crooked, a little sad. "I want this ranch to succeed. I want to breed horses that people will travel across the country to buy. I want to build something lasting, something I can pass on to my children someday." He paused, then added quietly, "And I want someone to share it with. This ranch, this life. It's hollow when you're living it alone." Zelda's heart was pounding so hard she was sure he must be able to hear it. "Harrison, I'm leaving for Billings in 2 days. I know." His hand came up and he tucked a loose strand of her hair behind her ear, his fingers lingering against her cheek. "But maybe you don't have to. Maybe there's another option you haven't considered." "What option?" Zelda whispered, though she thought she knew what he was going to say, thought her heart might burst out of her chest if he actually said it. "Stay," Harrison said simply. "Stay here, work with the horses. I'll pay you a fair wage, the same as I pay my best hands. You can have your own cabin, complete independence. Just stay and do what you were born to do instead of wasting your talent sewing dresses in Billings." It was not what she had expected him to say, and the disappointment that crashed through her was sharp enough to make her gasp. Of course he was not offering anything romantic. He barely knew her. He was simply being practical, recognizing a valuable skill when he saw it. "I'll think about it," she managed, pulling back from his touch before she did something foolish like cry. "I should go to bed. Tomorrow's going to be a long day." She fled before he could respond, and she did not let herself look back. The third morning dawned clear and bright, and Zelda woke with a sense of purpose that had nothing to do with the confused tangle of emotions churning in her chest. Today she would ride Midnight. Today she would prove that the stallion was not beyond saving, that with patience and understanding, even the most frightened creature could learn to trust again. She dressed carefully, choosing her sturdiest skirt and most practical boots. When she came downstairs, Harrison was already waiting with coffee and breakfast. His eyes searched her face, and she wondered if he could see the confusion she was trying so hard to hide. "Ready?" he asked. "Ready," Zelda confirmed. The entire ranch had turned out to watch. Zelda counted at least a dozen men gathered around the corral, including Marcus and the other 2 who had been injured by Midnight. Harrison had tried to send them away, to give Zelda the privacy she had requested, but she shook her head. "Let them watch," she said. "If I succeed, they need to see it. If I fail, they'll be right about women not being able to do this kind of work, and I'll have to live with that." Midnight was waiting in the corral, and his ears pricked forward when he saw Zelda approaching. She felt a swell of affection for the beautiful animal who had come so far in just 3 days. She entered the corral alone, the saddle draped over one arm, and Midnight walked right up to her, pushing his nose against her shoulder in greeting. "Hello, beautiful," Zelda murmured, stroking his neck. "Today's the big day. Are you ready to show everyone how brave you are?" Saddling Midnight went smoothly, though Zelda took her time, checking every buckle and strap twice. When she was satisfied, she stood at the stallion's shoulder and placed her hand on the saddle horn. Midnight's ears swiveled back, listening to her breathing, waiting to see what she would do. "Easy," Zelda said softly. She put her foot in the stirrup, putting some weight on it but not yet mounting. Midnight shifted but did not move away. Zelda repeated the process several times, gradually putting more weight in the stirrup, letting the horse adjust to the sensation. Finally, in one smooth motion, she swung herself up into the saddle. Midnight's entire body tensed beneath her, every muscle coiled like a spring. Zelda sat perfectly still, her weight balanced, her hands light on the reins. She could feel the stallion trembling, could sense how close he was to exploding into a bucking frenzy. This was the moment where everything could fall apart. "You're all right," Zelda murmured, her voice steady despite her racing heart. "I've got you. You're safe." Long seconds stretched out, feeling like hours, and then, slowly, miraculously, Midnight relaxed. His head came down, his ears swiveled forward, and he let out a long breath that seemed to release all the tension in his body. Zelda's throat tightened with emotion. "Good boy," she whispered. "Such a good, brave boy." She sat there for several minutes, just letting Midnight adjust to her weight, her presence. Then, very gently, she squeezed her legs against his sides. Midnight took a cautious step forward, then another. Zelda guided him into a slow walk around the corral, and the stallion responded to her cues as if he had been doing this his entire life. The men watching erupted into cheers and whistles. Zelda barely heard them. All her attention was focused on the magnificent animal beneath her, on the trust he was showing by allowing her to guide him. She walked him around the corral 3 times, then gently drew him to a halt and dismounted. Midnight turned his head to look at her, and Zelda would have sworn she saw gratitude in those dark eyes. She wrapped her arms around his neck, pressing her face against his warm coat, and felt tears slip down her cheeks. This was what she had been missing. This connection, this purpose, this feeling of being exactly where she was meant to be. When she finally left the corral, Harrison was standing at the gate, and the expression on his face was unlike anything she had seen before. It was pure wonder, mixed with something deeper, something that made her breath catch. "Zelda," he said, and his voice was rough with emotion. "That was incredible. You're incredible." The ranch hands crowded around, congratulating her, asking questions about her techniques. Marcus shook her hand with his good arm, his weathered face split in a genuine grin. "I owe you an apology, Miss Carmichael," he said. "I didn't think you could do it, and I was wrong. You've got a real gift." "Thank you," Zelda said, still feeling dazed from the ride, from the emotion of it all. Harrison eventually herded everyone back to their work, leaving him and Zelda standing alone by the corral. Midnight had wandered over to the water trough and was drinking deeply, looking more relaxed than Zelda had yet seen him. "You did it," Harrison said. 3 days, just like you promised. Name your price. It's yours." The words from that first night echoed between them, but everything felt different now. Zelda looked up at Harrison, at the man who had given her a chance when no one else would, who had watched her work with patience and respect, who had offered her a job doing what she loved instead of what she had resigned herself to. "I don't want to go to Billings," she heard herself say. Harrison went very still. "No, no," Zelda took a breath, gathering her courage. "I want to stay here. I want to work with your horses. I want to do what I was meant to do." The smile that spread across Harrison's face was like sunrise, bright and warm and full of promise. "The job's yours, then. Fair wages, your own cabin, and as much time with the horses as you want." "There's something else," Zelda said, her heart pounding. "Last night you said you wanted someone to share this life with. Did you mean that?" Harrison's smile faded into something more serious, more intense. "Yes. Because I haven't been able to stop thinking about what you said, about how life's too short to just survive, how at some point you have to let yourself live again. Zelda stepped closer to him, close enough to see the gold flecks in his amber eyes. I think maybe I'm ready to live again, Harrison. And I think maybe I want to do it here with you. For a long moment, Harrison just stared at her, as if he could not quite believe what he was hearing. Then he closed the distance between them in one long stride, his hands coming up to cup her face with a gentleness that took her breath away. "Are you sure?" he asked, his voice low and urgent. "I know we've only known each other 3 days. I know this is crazy. But Zelda, from the moment you walked up to that corral and said you could break my horse, I haven't been able to stop thinking about you. If you stay, I want it to be for more than just the job. I want to court you properly to see if what I'm feeling is real." "I'm sure," Zelda whispered, and then Harrison was kissing her, his lips warm and firm against hers, and the world seemed to tilt on its axis. The kiss was gentle at first, tentative, a question being asked and answered. But as Zelda melted into him, her hands coming up to grip his shoulders, it deepened into something more passionate, more desperate. Harrison's arms wrapped around her waist, pulling her close, and Zelda felt like she was falling and flying all at once. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Harrison rested his forehead against hers. "I'm going to do this right," he said. "I'm going to court you like you deserve. We'll take our time, get to know each other properly. But Zelda, I need you to know that I've never felt this way about anyone before. You walked into my life 3 days ago, and somehow you've already become essential." Zelda's heart felt like it might burst. "I feel the same way. It's terrifying and wonderful all at once." "We'll figure it out together," Harrison promised. He kissed her again, softer this time, then reluctantly stepped back. "I should let you rest. You've had a hard 3 days." "I should send a telegram to the seamstress in Billings," Zelda said. "Let her know I won't be taking the position after all. I'll have one of the hands ride into town this afternoon." Harrison reached out and took her hand, threading his fingers through hers. "Welcome home, Zelda. Home." The word settled into Zelda's chest like a warm glow. She had not had a home in 3 years. Not really. She had had places to sleep, places to work, but nothing that felt like home. Standing here with Harrison's hand wrapped around hers, the Montana sun warm on her face and the sound of midnight nickering softly from the corral, Zelda thought maybe she had finally found where she belonged. The weeks that followed were some of the happiest of Zelda's life. Harrison had a small cabin built for her, a cozy one-room structure with a wood stove and a comfortable bed and windows that looked out over the horse pastures. Zelda spent her days working with the ranch's horses, not just Midnight but the others as well. She taught the younger horses to accept saddle and bridle, worked with the older ones to smooth out bad habits, and began planning a breeding program with Harrison that would produce the finest horses in Montana. And in the evenings, Harrison would come to her cabin or she would go up to the main house, and they would sit together and talk for hours. They talked about everything, their pasts, their dreams, their fears. Harrison told her about growing up on a small farm in Missouri, about losing his parents to cholera when he was 16, about working cattle drives, until he had saved enough money to buy his first piece of land in Montana. Zelda told him about her childhood on her father's ranch, about the joy of working with horses and the devastation of watching everything slip away. They talked, and they kissed, and slowly, carefully, they fell in love. Harrison courted her with an old-fashioned formality that Zelda found both touching and endearing. He brought her wildflowers from the prairie, took her on long rides through the rolling hills to show her the boundaries of his ranch, sat with her in the evenings while she mended tack, or he worked on the ranch's account books. He was unfailingly respectful, never pushing for more than Zelda was ready to give, but the heat in his eyes when he looked at her made it clear that his feelings ran deep. On a crisp October evening, 2 months after Zelda had first ridden Midnight, Harrison asked her to go for a walk with him. They wandered away from the ranch buildings, out to a small rise that overlooked the Yellowstone River. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink, and the air smelled of grass and sage and the promise of coming winter. "I've been thinking," Harrison said, taking both of Zelda's hands in his. "These past 2 months have been the best of my life. Coming home at the end of the day and knowing you're here, working side by side with you in the corrals, talking with you about everything and nothing. I can't imagine my life without you in it anymore, Zelda." Zelda's heart was pounding, her breath coming short. "Harrison, what are you saying?" He dropped to one knee in the prairie grass, and Zelda's hands flew to her mouth. "I'm saying I love you, Zelda Carmichael. I'm saying I want to spend the rest of my life with you, building this ranch together, raising horses and children together, growing old together. Will you marry me?" The tears were streaming down Zelda's face now, and she nodded frantically, unable to speak past the lump in her throat. "Yes," she finally managed. "Yes, Harrison, of course I'll marry you." Harrison surged to his feet and swept her into his arms, spinning her around until they were both laughing and crying at once. When he set her down, he pulled a simple gold ring from his pocket and slid it onto her finger. It was a little too big, but Zelda did not care. It was perfect because it came from him. "I'll get it sized properly in town," Harrison said, holding her hand up to admire the ring in the fading light. "And we can have a proper wedding, invite people from all over the territory if you want." "I don't need anything fancy," Zelda said, looking up into his amber eyes. "I just need you." They were married in early November in the small church in Miles City. The whole town turned out for the wedding, curious to see the woman who had tamed Harrison Zane's killer stallion, and apparently the rancher himself. Zelda wore a simple cream-colored dress that she had sewn herself, and Harrison wore his best suit, his dark hair freshly cut, and his face clean-shaven for the occasion. As they stood before the minister and exchanged their vows, Zelda felt a sense of rightness settle over her like a warm blanket. This was what she had been searching for without even knowing it: a partner, a home, a purpose. Harrison's hand was warm and steady in hers, and when he said, "I do," his voice was strong and sure. The wedding supper was held at the ranch, with tables set up in the barn and lanterns strung from the rafters. There was fiddle music and dancing, beef and potatoes and fresh bread, and more laughter than Zelda had heard in years. She danced with Harrison until her feet ached, and when he finally swept her up in his arms and carried her to the main house amid cheers and whistles from the guests, she felt like the happiest woman alive. Their wedding night was tender and passionate all at once, full of whispered words and gentle touches, and the joy of finally belonging completely to each other. Harrison made love to her with a reverence that brought tears to Zelda's eyes, and when she fell asleep in his arms, she felt completely safe and completely loved for the first time since her mother died. The years that followed were not always easy, but they were good. Montana winters were brutal, and there were times when they lost cattle to blizzards or horses to illness. But Harrison and Zelda faced every challenge together, their partnership growing stronger with each obstacle they overcame. Zelda's breeding program proved to be even more successful than they had hoped. Midnight sired foals that were fast, strong, and intelligent, and word spread throughout the territory about the quality of horses from the Zane Ranch. Buyers came from as far as Texas and California to purchase Midnight's offspring, and the ranch prospered. In the spring of 1884, Zelda gave birth to their first child, a boy they named Henry. He had his father's dark hair and his mother's green eyes, and from the time he could walk, he followed Zelda to the corrals, fascinated by the horses. Watching Harrison teach their son to ride, seeing the patience and love he showed the boy, made Zelda fall in love with her husband all over again. 2 years later, a daughter arrived, a red-faced, squalling bundle they named Sarah. She was more cautious than her brother but equally fascinated by the horses, and by the time she was 5, she could saddle and bridle her own pony without help. The ranch grew, and so did the Zane family. In 1889, another son arrived, Samuel, and 3 years after that, a daughter named Emma. The house rang with the sound of children's laughter, and the corrals were always full of horses in various stages of training. Midnight lived to the ripe old age of 22, siring dozens of foals that carried on his bloodline. When he finally passed away peacefully in his sleep in 1900, Harrison and Zelda buried him on the rise overlooking the Yellowstone River, the same place where Harrison had proposed all those years ago. They stood together with their arms around each other, their children gathered close and said goodbye to the horse that had brought them together. "He was special," Harrison said, his voice thick with emotion. "He was," Zelda agreed, leaning her head against her husband's shoulder. "He gave me back my purpose, my joy, and he led me to you." Harrison kissed the top of her head, his arms tightening around her. "I used to think I bought that horse for breeding stock to improve the ranch, but I think maybe fate had other plans. Maybe he was always meant to bring you to me." As the years passed and their children grew, Henry showed an aptitude for the business side of ranching, taking over more and more of the daily operations as Harrison's hair turned gray. Sarah became as skilled with horses as her mother, developing her own techniques for working with difficult animals. Samuel went east to study law but returned to Montana to practice, helping the family navigate the increasingly complex legal landscape of land ownership and water rights. And Emma married a neighboring rancher's son, bringing two families together in alliance and friendship. By 1910, Harrison and Zelda's ranch was one of the most successful in Montana, known throughout the West for the quality of its horses. But for Zelda, the true measure of success was not in the size of the herd or the money in the bank. It was in the life she and Harrison had built together, in the family they had raised, in the love that had only grown deeper with time. On their 30th wedding anniversary, Harrison took Zelda back to the rise above the river where he had proposed. They were both in their 50s now, their hair streaked with gray, their faces lined by years of sun and wind and laughter. But when Harrison looked at Zelda, she could still see the same love in his amber eyes that had been there on their wedding day. "I've been thinking about that first day you rode midnight," Harrison said, pulling Zelda close against his side. "About how you walked up to that corral with nothing but determination and courage, and you did something nobody else could do. I knew that day that you were extraordinary, but I had no idea just how much you would change my life." "You changed mine too," Zelda said softly. "I was so lost before I came here, Harrison. I had given up on ever being truly happy again. And then I met you, and suddenly everything I thought I had lost was given back to me. Purpose, joy, love, a home. You gave me those same things," Harrison said. "This ranch was just a business before you. Now it's a legacy, something our children and grandchildren will carry on long after we're gone. You did that, Zelda. You and your remarkable gift with horses and people." They stood together as the sun set over the Montana plains, painting the sky in the same shades of orange and pink that had colored the evening of Harrison's proposal. In the distance, they could see their house, smoke rising from the chimney, lights glowing in the windows. Their children were there with their own families, gathered for the anniversary celebration that would begin when Harrison and Zelda returned. "You ever regret it?" Harrison asked suddenly. "Giving up your plans to go to Billings, staying here instead?" Zelda turned to look at her husband, this man who had given her everything she never knew she needed. "Not for a single second," she said firmly. "This is exactly where I was meant to be." Harrison smiled and leaned down to kiss her, and Zelda kissed him back with all the love and passion of 30 years of marriage. When they finally broke apart, both a little breathless, Harrison took her hand and they started walking back toward the house together. "Come on," he said. "Our family is waiting, and I believe there's a cake with our names on it." "And dancing," Zelda added with a grin. "Don't forget the dancing. I expect you to sweep me off my feet like you did on our wedding day." "Every day for the rest of my life," Harrison promised, and Zelda knew he meant it. They walked home hand in hand, two people who had found each other in the most unlikely circumstances and built a life that exceeded their wildest dreams. The wild horse and the determined woman, the lonely rancher and the lost girl who found her way home. It was a love story written in the dust of Montana corrals, in the thunder of horses' hooves, in the quiet moments of understanding that passed between two people who truly saw each other. And as the stars began to emerge in the vast Montana sky, Harrison and Zelda Zane walked into their warm, bright house filled with family and laughter, living proof that sometimes the most broken things can be healed, and sometimes the best love stories begin with a single moment of courage and a horse that nearly killed 3 men. The anniversary celebration lasted well into the night, with fiddle music and stories, and 4 generations of Zanes gathered together under one roof. Henry's oldest son, just 14, cornered Zelda at one point to ask her to tell the story again, the one about how she and grandfather had met. "It was a black stallion," Zelda began, settling into a chair with a cup of cider in her hands. "The most beautiful and the most terrified horse I had ever seen. He had nearly killed 3 men, and everyone thought he needed to be destroyed. But I looked at him, and I saw something worth saving." "And then grandfather said, 'Name your price.'" Young Harrison Jr. chimed in, grinning. He had heard this story dozens of times, but he never tired of it. "He did," Zelda confirmed, smiling at the memory. "And I said I could break the horse in 3 days. I had no money, no prospects, and I was supposed to be on a stage to Billings to become a seamstress. But something made me stop and look at that horse, and something made me believe I could help him." "Because you could," Sarah said, coming to sit beside her mother. She put her hand over Zelda's, squeezing gently. "You've always had a gift, Mama, with horses and with people." "The gift is patience," Zelda said, "and the willingness to see past the fear to what lies beneath. That horse wasn't mean, he was scared. Once I understood that, the rest was just time and trust." "And you fell in love with grandfather while you were breaking midnight," Emma added, smiling from across the room where she sat with her own husband and children. "Well, that part wasn't planned," Zelda admitted, feeling her cheeks warm as Harrison caught her eye from across the room and winked. "But yes, I did. How could I not? He gave me a chance when no one else would. He saw value in me beyond what I could offer as a wife or a housekeeper. He respected my skills and my intelligence, and he offered me a partnership in every sense of the word." "Best decision I ever made," Harrison said, coming to stand behind Zelda's chair. He put his hands on her shoulders, and she reached up to cover one of his hands with her own. "Aside from buying that crazy horse in the first place, of course. Midnight brought us together," Zelda said softly. "Everything that came after, this ranch, our family, the legacy we built, it all started with that one frightened horse and my stubborn belief that he could be saved." "You saved more than just the horse, Mama," Henry said quietly. His wife was beside him, their children scattered throughout the room. You saved this whole ranch, really. The breeding program you developed made us what we are today. Papa always says you're the real brains behind this operation. Your father is too modest, Zelda protested, but Harrison shook his head. It's true. I had land and cattle and a dream, but you brought the expertise and the vision that made it all possible. We're partners, Zelda. We always have been. Every success this ranch has had is as much yours as mine. The love and pride in his voice brought tears to Zelda's eyes. After 30 years, he could still make her heart flutter with just a few words. She stood and turned to face him, reaching up to cup his weathered, beloved face in her hands. We built this together, she said firmly. Everything we have, everything we are, we made it together. That's what partnership means. Harrison kissed her softly, oblivious to the amused and affectionate looks from their children and grandchildren. When he pulled back, he was smiling. To 30 more years, he said, raising his glass of cider. To 30 more years, everyone echoed, raising their own glasses. But as it turned out, they got 43 more years together. Harrison passed away peacefully in his sleep in 1953 at the age of 97, with Zelda holding his hand. She followed him just 6 months later, unable or unwilling to live without the man who had been her partner, her love, her everything for more than 7 decades. They were buried side by side on the rise above the Yellowstone River, next to Midnight's grave. Their children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren gathered to say goodbye, and as the minister spoke of love and legacy and lives well lived, a black horse appeared on the ridge above them. It was one of Midnight's great-great-grandsons, bearing the same distinctive white star on his forehead, and he stood silhouetted against the Montana sky, as if keeping watch over the graves of the people who had saved his ancestor and built a dynasty from that single act of courage. The Zane Ranch continued to thrive for generations, always specializing in the breeding and training of fine horses, always run by descendants who had learned their craft at Zelda's knee. And every child born into the family learned the story of the woman who broke the horse that nearly killed 3 men, and the cowboy who said, "Name your price, it's yours," and how that moment changed the course of all their lives. It was a love story for the ages, written in the dust of Montana and sealed with trust, courage, and the kind of partnership that comes along once in a lifetime. And though Harrison and Zelda Zane were long gone, their legacy lived on in every horse that bore Midnight's bloodline, in every child who learned to break horses with patience instead of force, and in the love story that became legend in Miles City, Montana, and beyond. The end of their story was really just the beginning of something larger, a testament to what 2 people can build when they find each other at exactly the right moment, when courage meets opportunity, and when love is given the chance to grow deep roots in good soil. Harrison and Zelda had found their happily ever after not in a fairy tale ending, but in the daily work of building a life together, one day, one horse, one choice at a time. And if you asked any of their descendants what the secret was, what made Harrison and Zelda's marriage last for 7 decades and produce a legacy that endured for generations, they would all tell you the same thing: trust, partnership, and the willingness to see the value in broken things. Because sometimes the most beautiful stories begin with something that seems beyond saving, and sometimes the greatest love affairs start with a simple question: can you break him? And the brave answer: yes, I can. In the end, that was what Zelda Carmichael Zane's life came down to. She could break horses, she could build dreams, and she could love with her whole heart. And when you combine those 3 gifts with Harrison Zane's steadfast support, business acumen, and equally fierce love, you got something truly extraordinary. You got a ranch that became an empire, a family that became a dynasty, and a love story that would be told and retold for generations to come. On the graves overlooking the Yellowstone River, the epitaphs were simple but perfect. Harrison Zane, 1856–1953, beloved husband, father, grandfather. He built a legacy from Montana dust. Zelda Carmichael Zane, 1860–1953, beloved wife, mother, grandmother. She broke horses and barriers with equal grace, and between their graves, a small marker for midnight, the horse that had brought them together and started it all. Because in the end, it really had all begun with that black stallion, that frightened, magnificent animal that nobody could ride until a determined young woman with green eyes and her father's gift decided to try. The sun set over the Montana plains, painting the sky in familiar shades of orange and pink, and on the rise above the Yellowstone River, 3 graves stood in silent testament to courage, love, and the enduring power of partnership. The wind whispered through the grass, carrying with it the distant sound of horses nickering in the corrals below, and the Zane ranch continued on, just as Harrison and Zelda had always intended. Their story was complete, their ending happy, their legacy secure. And sometimes, on quiet evenings when the light was just right, ranch hands swore they could see 2 figures standing on the rise hand in hand, watching over the land they had loved and the family they had built, together until the end and beyond.